You can't be serious, Father, I said, my voice wavering as I stared at him across the massive glass conference table. The floor-to-ceiling windows of Bennett Medical Group's executive floor offered a panoramic view of the hospital campus below, a kingdom Victor Bennett had built from the ground up, and one he refused to let me help lead. My father leaned back in his ergonomic chair, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression calm and composed as always. He exhaled slowly, adjusting his gold cufflinks, a gift from the board after their most profitable quarter last year. "This is not up for discussion, Olivia," he said, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the ignored proposal I'd spent months preparing. "The executive committee has already decided." My fists clenched at my sides, the freshly manicured nails digging into my palms. The sting helped me focus, kept me from shouting. I refused to give the other board members, mostly men in their 60s who'd been my father's golfing buddies for decades, the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. "So that's it?" I asked, my words sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You'd rather hand the clinical operations director position to Ethan, someone who couldn't even finish medical school, than let me prove myself, all because I'm a woman?" Father didn't even flinch. The hospital's mission statement, compassionate care, innovative medicine, glowed on the wall behind him, a mockery of the conversation we were having. "This division is for your brother to manage, Olivia," he said firmly, straightening his silk tie. "You've done exceptionally well with your healthcare administration degree, and your patient advocacy program has been interesting. But clinical operations requires a certain authority that patients and doctors alike respect. My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm 31 years old, Johns Hopkins educated with a master's in healthcare administration, and the daughter of Victor Bennett, CEO of Bennett Medical Group, one of the largest private hospital networks in the Northeast. My entire life has been about proving myself, earning my undergraduate degree in public health with honors, completing dual master's programs, implementing successful patient care initiatives that reduced readmission rates by 17%. Also, I could follow in my father's footsteps and transform our hospitals into truly patient-centered institutions. But standing there in that sterile conference room, watching the morning light reflect off medical awards and financial growth charts, I felt my carefully constructed world shift beneath me. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how much I loved healthcare. To him, I was just his daughter, someone who should be satisfied running charity galas and wellness programs while the men handled the real business of medicine. I looked him straight in the eye, finding my voice again, steadier now. "Ethan doesn't care about patient outcomes, Dad. He's never completed a clinical rotation in his life. He dropped out of medical school in his 3rd year, and he has absolutely no idea how to balance quality care with operational efficiency. You know that as well as I do." My father sighed, rubbing his temple like I was giving him a migraine. His Rolex, the one Mother gave him when he opened his first hospital, caught the light. "Ethan will learn. He's my son, Olivia. The Bennett name in medicine goes back 3 generations of men. And you," he paused, his voice softening just slightly, revealing the father beneath the CEO, "you have other options, a future that doesn't involve the stress of running a medical division. I'm protecting you." I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips, echoing against the minimalist decor. "Protecting me?" I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "You're not protecting me, Dad. You're holding me back. I've earned this. I've worked harder than anyone, including Ethan, and you know it. My patient-centered care initiative saved this hospital group $2 million last year while improving satisfaction scores. But you won't even give me a chance because you're too stuck in your antiquated views to see what I'm capable of." His expression hardened, the momentary glimpse of fatherly concern vanishing. I knew I'd pushed too far. "That's enough, Olivia," he said, his voice sharp as a scalpel. Women make excellent care coordinators and wellness directors. That's where your talents lie. We're done here. I stormed out of the conference room, my heels clicking angrily against the polished marble hallway adorned with portraits of Bennett physicians dating back to the 1920s, all men, of course. The sound echoed through the administrative wing of our flagship hospital, past framed newspaper articles celebrating my father's medical empire. My mother was in the hospital's atrium, quietly arranging an elaborate flower display for the annual donor appreciation event. Her elegant hands, once skilled at inserting IVs and dressing wounds during her nursing days, now perfectly positioned orchids and roses. She looked up as I passed, her expression soft but weary, the lines around her eyes betraying years of similar disappointments. "Olivia," she said gently, catching my arm. "What happened, sweetheart?" I stopped, turning to her with a volatile mix of frustration and desperation threatening to spill over. "He won't let me run clinical operations," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to control it. "He's handing everything over to Ethan, and he expects me to smile and plan charity events instead." She sighed, her hands stilling over the flowers, a distant look crossing her face. "Your father, he has his ways," she said, her tone hesitant. "But maybe it's best not to push him right now, dear. The board meeting next month has him stressed." "He means well." I stared at her, stunned by her response. "Means well?" I repeated incredulously. "Mom, he's throwing away everything I've worked for because I'm a woman. How can you stand there and defend that? You were one of the most promising nursing leaders at Massachusetts General before you married him." She lowered her gaze, and I could see the years of quiet submission etched into her once determined face. The brilliant nurse who developed innovative patient care protocols, now arranging flowers and hosting galas. "I just don't want to see you hurt, Olivia," she said softly, adjusting her pearl necklace, another anniversary gift from my father. "Sometimes it's easier to accept the roles we're given." I found my happiness. Her words hung in the air between us, and I realized in that moment that I was truly on my own. The realization cut deeper than my father's rejection. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the recessed lighting in my downtown apartment ceiling, the weight of my father's words pressed down on me like a lead X-ray apron. I thought about everything I'd done to get to this point, endless nights analyzing healthcare metrics, research projects on improving patient outcomes while reducing costs, the sacrifices I'd made to live up to the Bennett medical legacy. The prestigious summer internships I'd secured on my own merit. The innovative care protocols I'd developed that were now being implemented in hospitals across 3 states. And for what? To be told I didn't belong in leadership, that my only value was to organize fundraisers and marry into another powerful medical family? The thought made my stomach turn like I'd swallowed something toxic. The next morning, I was halfway through packing my credentials portfolio when the door to my home office creaked open. My mother stood there, her face pale with confusion, still elegant in her designer suit ready for another hospital function. "Olivia, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice laced with worry, eyes darting to the open laptop displaying my CV and the framed medical administration license I'd just removed from the wall. Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her, his brows furrowed in irritation, white coat still on from his symbolic weekly rounds. "What's all this?" he demanded, stepping into the room, the scent of expensive aftershave and hospital antiseptic following him. "Where do you think you're going?" Ethan showed up last, leaning casually against the doorframe, still in wrinkled scrubs though I knew he hadn't set foot in an examination room in years. "Planning a sabbatical, sis?" he asked with that familiar smirk. "The wellness center in Aspen is amazing this time of year." I closed my portfolio with a snap and stood tall, facing them all. I'm leaving Bennett Medical Group, I said simply, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Since I'm not welcome in a leadership role and apparently don't belong in this family's vision for healthcare, I'm going to find an institution that values evidence-based management and patient-centered care. My father's face darkened like storm clouds gathering, and my mother clutched her necklace, looking like she was about to cry. Olivia, she said softly, don't do this. Let's talk about it. Your father has been under tremendous pressure with the merger negotiations. But I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. There's nothing to talk about. You've all made your priorities crystal clear. My father's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer, his imposing presence filling the room just as it did during board meetings. Don't be ridiculous, Olivia, he said, his tone cold and dismissive. This is your legacy. The Bennett name opens every door in medicine. Where else would you go? And for what? To make some sort of feminist point? I met his gaze without flinching, something I'd trained myself to do since my first clinical rotation. Yes, Dad, I said firmly, to make a point that I'm worth more than being pushed aside for someone who couldn't handle the pressure of medical school. You made it clear yesterday that I have no place in your executive team, so I'll find a healthcare system that values what I bring to the table. Ethan let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're really making a big deal out of nothing, Liv, he said, crossing his arms over his wrinkled scrubs. You're throwing a tantrum just because Dad isn't handing you the keys to the kingdom. There's more to running a hospital than patient satisfaction surveys. His dismissive tone pushed me over the edge. This isn't a tantrum, Ethan, I snapped. It's me taking control of my career, something you've never had to do because everything's been handed to you, including a vice presidency after you failed your USMLE Step 2 twice. My father raised a hand, silencing us both. Enough, he said sternly. Olivia, you're not leaving. You belong here with Bennett Medical. The community wellness program needs your touch. I shook my head, picking up my portfolio and medical journals. No, Dad. I belong somewhere I'm valued for my brain, not my touch, and clearly, that's not here. I walked past them, my certification documents and laptop under my arm as I made my way down the hallway lined with family photos, graduation ceremonies, hospital ribbon cuttings, charity galas, the visual history of the Bennett medical dynasty. My mother followed, her heels clicking anxiously on the hardwood floors. Olivia, please don't go, she said softly. We can figure this out as a family. Your father just needs time to see your potential. I stopped at the entrance and turned to look at her, this woman who had once been a pioneering nurse leader before marrying into the Bennett legacy, who had slowly surrendered her own medical career for family harmony. Mom, I said gently, I love you, but I can't keep pretending that things will change if I stay. Dad's had 8 years since I completed my master's degree to see my potential. He won't suddenly have an epiphany now. My father stood at the end of the hallway, watching silently, his expression unreadable behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Ethan leaned against the family portrait wall, clearly unfazed, scrolling through his phone like my departure meant nothing. I opened the front door and turned back one last time. When you're ready to treat me like a qualified healthcare administrator and not just a daughter who needs to marry well, you know where to find me, I said, my voice calm but firm. Then I walked out, the crisp morning air hitting my face as I closed the door behind me. For the first time since I'd joined Bennett Medical Group after graduation, I felt my shoulders relax, the weight of constant scrutiny lifting. I felt truly free to practice the kind of medicine I believed in. I didn't look back at the building that housed both my family's residence and the administrative headquarters of Bennett Medical Group. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Work and family had always been inseparable in our world. After leaving Bennett Medical Group, within days, I secured an interview at Metro Community Health Center, one of the most respected public hospitals in the region. They didn't care that I was a Bennett, all they cared about were my credentials, my innovative approaches to healthcare administration, and my passion for patient-centered care. When I walked into that aging but immaculately maintained facility, I wasn't Victor Bennett's daughter, I was Olivia Bennett, Johns Hopkins graduate and determined healthcare administrator with proven results. The building itself couldn't have been more different from my father's gleaming medical towers. Metro's mid-century architecture housed equipment that was functional rather than cutting-edge, and the waiting rooms were filled with patients from all walks of life rather than the wealthy clientele my father's hospitals primarily served. By the end of the week, Dr. Camila Rodriguez, the hospital's director, offered me a position as their healthcare improvement coordinator. For the first time in my professional life, I felt like I belonged somewhere for what I could do, not for who I was related to. Your ideas about reducing wait times while improving care quality are exactly what we need, Dr. Rodriguez told me, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. She'd built her entire career in public health, working her way up from a community clinic in her immigrant neighborhood to running one of the city's most efficient hospitals despite constant budget constraints. "I'm not going to lie to you," she continued, leaning forward across her desk cluttered with patient files and grant proposals. "We don't have the resources your family's hospitals have. Our MRI machine is 5 years old, and we're constantly fighting for funding. But what we do have is a staff that truly cares and an administration willing to innovate." The work was challenging but deeply rewarding. I was given real responsibility and authority to implement changes, something my father had never trusted me with. Our patient population was diverse and often underserved, with complex medical and social needs that required creative solutions. Within a few months, I was leading a major initiative to redesign patient flow through the emergency department, resulting in reduced wait times and better outcomes. My team consisted of dedicated healthcare professionals who judged me solely on my ideas and work ethic, not my last name. Dr. Rodriguez became more than just my boss. She became a mentor who pushed me to take on greater responsibility. "You have a gift for seeing both the human and systems elements of healthcare," she told me after I successfully reorganized their chronic care management program. "That's rare, especially in administrators who haven't worked directly with patients." As much as I was thriving professionally, the nights were harder. Cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, no matter how justified it felt. There were moments, quiet ones, like coming home to my apartment after a long day of budget meetings and staff training, when the weight of it all would hit me. I missed my mother's gentle presence, even if she never stood up for me. I even missed Ethan's annoying jokes and the way he could sometimes make the entire hospital staff laugh during the annual holiday party. But what hurt the most was knowing my father didn't think twice about letting me go, his own daughter, who shared his passion for medicine, just not his outdated views. I hadn't heard from any of them in months. Not even my mother had called, though I'd seen her name on my caller ID twice before the calls were disconnected. I imagined my father standing nearby, silently disapproving of any contact. Months passed, and I poured everything I had into my work at Metro. The challenges were enormous: securing grants for new equipment, developing protocols that worked with limited resources, training staff to provide excellent care despite overwhelming patient loads. Often, I found myself in the hospital until midnight, reviewing processes and looking for efficiencies that wouldn't compromise care quality. With each successful initiative, my confidence grew. The emergency room redesign led to a 22% reduction in wait times. My chronic care coordination program reduced readmissions by 18%. The community health outreach I developed brought preventive care to neighborhoods that had historically low engagement with the medical system. I wasn't just a healthcare administrator anymore. I was becoming a force for change in community medicine. Dr. Rodriguez started bringing me to regional healthcare conferences, where my data-driven approaches to improving care while controlling costs gained attention. The growth wasn't just professional, it was personal too. I learned to stand on my own, to make decisions without worrying about whether they would please my father or fit into the Bennett healthcare philosophy. I developed my own leadership style, collaborative rather than authoritarian, focused on evidence rather than tradition. Every positive patient outcome felt like proof that I was more than they had ever given me credit for. I wasn't just Victor Bennett's daughter, I was Olivia Bennett, healthcare innovator, and I was making a name for myself on my own terms. One afternoon, after a particularly successful quarterly review meeting where we'd presented significant improvements across all departments, Dr. Rodriguez called me into her office. It was modest but practical, nothing like my father's mahogany-paneled domain, but somehow more authentic with its walls covered in public health campaign posters and thank you cards from patients. She gestured for me to take a seat and leaned back in her chair, her keen eyes studying me intently, a stack of medical journals serving as a paperweight on budget reports. "Olivia," she began, her tone measured, fingers steepled in front of her, "I have a case I think you're ready for. It's significant, complicated, and it's going to put you in the spotlight. Not just here at Metro, but citywide." I nodded, intrigued and slightly concerned by her serious expression. "What's the case?" I asked, leaning forward slightly, my mind already running through possibilities, perhaps the major healthcare grant we'd applied for, or the innovative community care initiative we'd been developing. She hesitated for a moment, took a deep breath, then continued, "We're representing a patient in a major medical malpractice suit against Bennett Medical Group." She paused, watching my reaction carefully. "They're suing your father's hospital for negligence in a case involving delayed diagnosis and improper treatment protocols. The patient, Mrs. Elena Vega, experienced catastrophic complications that could have been prevented. The stakes are enormous for her family, and the case is gaining attention in medical circles." The words hit me like a defibrillator shock. My stomach tightened into knots, and for a moment I couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implications cascaded through my mind. "You want me to help build a case against my father's hospital group?" I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt, though my knuckles had turned white as I gripped the armrests. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, her expression compassionate but resolute. "I know it's personal, Olivia, but that's exactly why I want you involved. You understand how Bennett Medical Group operates their protocols, their administrative structure, their approach to risk management. You're one of the sharpest healthcare administrators I've ever worked with, and you've proven your commitment to patient advocacy. If anyone can help ensure this woman gets justice, it's you." I took a deep breath, trying to process what she was asking. The Bennett name had been synonymous with medical excellence in this city for generations. Despite my personal conflicts with my father, I'd never questioned the quality of care their hospitals provided. "Camila," I said slowly, using her first name as we often did during serious discussions, "you realize what this could mean for me, personally and professionally? This isn't just another case, it's my family, my history. It could permanently burn any bridge that might still exist." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk cluttered with patient advocacy materials. "I understand that," she said firmly, "but this is your chance to demonstrate what you truly stand for, that patients come before profits, before family connections, before everything. This case represents exactly the kind of healthcare inequity you've been fighting against since you joined us." She slid a file folder across the desk. Mrs. Vega was admitted to Bennett Memorial with symptoms that clearly indicated a serious cardiac condition. Instead of being properly triaged, she waited for hours because she didn't have premium insurance. By the time she was seen, the damage was extensive. The cardiologist who eventually treated her has privately expressed concerns about the protocols but is afraid to speak out. I opened the file, scanning the medical details. The documentation was damning: clear signs missed, protocols not followed, decisions apparently made based on insurance status rather than medical need. My father's signature was on the hospital policy that had been implemented 6 months earlier, a policy I had argued against before I left. "This is a lot to take in," I said, my voice quieter now as I closed the file. The patient's face stared up at me from the attached photo, a middle-aged Latina woman, someone's mother, someone's wife. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, her expression understanding. "I don't expect you to decide right here and now. It's a big ask, Olivia, and I know how personal this is for you." I met her gaze, grateful for her patience and understanding. "Would it be all right if I reviewed the complete file first? I need to think about how this could affect everything, not just my career, but..." I trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Take all the time you need," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice steady. "But we need to move quickly if we're going to help Mrs. Vega. Her family is struggling with mounting medical bills for care that should never have been necessary. Let me know by the end of the day tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, city lights filtering through my blinds, my mind racing with everything at stake. The patient file lay open on my nightstand, Mrs. Vega's medical records telling a story of systemic failure, exactly the kind of case I'd gone into healthcare administration to prevent. Taking the case meant going up against my father, the man who had dismissed my capabilities and handed everything to Ethan without a second thought. It meant challenging the hospital group that bore my name, the legacy that had opened so many doors for me, even as it closed others. But it also meant standing up for a patient who had been wronged, advocating for the kind of healthcare I believed in: equitable, compassionate, and evidence-based. For 2 days, I went back and forth, weighing the professional and personal consequences. I thought about my father's cold dismissal of everything I'd worked for, about my mother's quiet resignation to the status quo, and about Ethan's smug sense of entitlement. But I also thought about the chance to truly embody the values I claimed to stand for, to show everyone, including myself, that I wasn't just talking about patient-centered care. I was willing to fight for it, even when it cost me personally. I reviewed Mrs. Vega's file repeatedly, noting discrepancies between official protocols and what had actually happened. I recognized the handwriting on some of the orders: doctors I'd known since childhood, administrators I'd worked alongside. This wasn't just about my father, it was about an entire system that sometimes prioritized efficiency and profitability over patient welfare. By the end of the second day, I made up my mind. I walked into Dr. Rodriguez's office the next morning, my shoulders squared and my voice steady despite a night of minimal sleep. "I'll help with the case," I said simply, placing Mrs. Vega's file on her desk with my preliminary analysis notes attached. Her face brightened with approval and what looked like respect. "I knew you would make the right choice," she said with a determined smile. "Your commitment to patients over politics is exactly why I wanted you here at Metro." She reached for her phone. "Let's get our legal team in here and start building this case. The depositions begin next week." The day of the first hearing arrived, and the tension in my body felt like a physical presence. As I entered the courthouse alongside our hospital's legal team and Mrs. Vega's family, I clutched my leather portfolio tightly, my heels clicking against the polished marble with every step. The weight of responsibility pressed down on my shoulders, not just professional responsibility to Metro and Mrs. Vega, but the moral weight of what I was about to do. The Vega family walked beside me, Elena in a wheelchair, her husband Carlos gently guiding her, their adult children flanking them protectively. Elena's once active body had been devastated by complications that proper care could have prevented. Looking at her, I felt my resolve strengthen. This case wasn't about my family drama, it was about justice for this woman. As I approached the front of the courtroom, I saw them, my father and Ethan, sitting at the opposing table alongside Bennett Medical Group's legal team. Our eyes met, and I felt their shock hit me like a physical force across the room. My father's jaw tightened immediately, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses as recognition dawned. Ethan's mouth fell open slightly before he quickly masked his surprise with that familiar smirk, though I could see the unease in his expression as he leaned over to whisper something to their lead attorney. I set my portfolio on our table and met their stares head-on. I wasn't going to look away or falter. I was here representing a patient who had been harmed by systemic failures, and nothing, not their surprise, not their disapproval, not the childhood memories threatening to surface, was going to throw me off. For a brief moment, my father's gaze softened almost imperceptibly, something flashing in his eyes that might have been hurt or disappointment. But he quickly composed himself, straightening his custom suit jacket and leaning over to whisper something to their chief counsel. I didn't care what he said. I was ready. As the proceedings began, I slipped into my role seamlessly, providing our attorneys with insights into Bennett Medical Group's operational procedures. Every protocol analysis, every staffing pattern explanation, every quality metric interpretation I offered was executed with precision and professional detachment. I kept my tone calm, my demeanor collected, and my focus solely on the medical facts of the case. When the judge addressed questions to me about hospital administration standards, I responded with confidence, never faltering under the weight of my father's scrutiny or Ethan's increasingly uncomfortable glances. The Bennett name was mentioned repeatedly throughout the proceedings, but I didn't flinch each time it was spoken. I wasn't Olivia, the daughter or sister, in that room. I was Olivia Bennett, healthcare administration expert for Metro Community Health Center, and I intended to ensure that Mrs. Vega received justice. Even when Ethan took the stand and fumbled through explanations of administrative decisions he clearly didn't understand, I maintained my professional composure, though internally I noted every misrepresentation and half-truth. My father sat quietly for most of the proceedings, his expression unreadable, but I could feel his eyes on me as I consulted with our attorneys or reviewed documentation. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to earn his approval anymore. I was there to uphold the medical ethics he himself had taught me as a child, before profit margins became his primary concern. After several hearings, it became painfully obvious, at least for my father and the Bennett Medical Group legal team, that our case was strong. Every argument their attorneys brought to the table crumbled under the weight of the evidence we presented. The medical records clearly showed neglect of established protocols. Testimony from staff members, some speaking anonymously for fear of retaliation, revealed a pattern of prioritizing insured patients. Ethan's testimony had been particularly damaging. His inexperience with actual hospital operations was glaring, and when questioned about the specific triage protocols that had been implemented under his supervision as clinical operations director, he contradicted himself repeatedly. My father tried to step in once or twice, but even his considerable influence couldn't salvage the damage Ethan's testimony had done. The tide was turning rapidly, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. By the fourth hearing, Bennett Medical Group proposed a settlement. I could see the frustration etched into my father's face as their lead counsel approached ours with the terms. After several rounds of negotiations, with Mrs. Vega and her family fully involved in the decision-making process, we agreed to a resolution that included not just substantial financial compensation, but also, at my insistence, mandatory protocol changes and staff retraining at all Bennett facilities. As the settlement documents were being signed, I caught my father glancing at me from across the room. He looked defeated, but there was something else in his expression, something that might have been regret, or perhaps reluctant respect. Ethan, on the other hand, avoided my gaze entirely, staring at his phone like a teenager being scolded. I didn't approach either of them. My work here was done, and I had proven exactly what I'd set out to, that patient care must always come before profit or convenience. Usually, after a settlement, I would stay behind to ensure our clients understood all the terms and to thank the legal team. It was something I always did, a small gesture of professionalism and compassion, regardless of how emotionally draining the case might have been. But this time, there was no opportunity. My father and Ethan had already gathered their things and were being ushered out a side door by their attorneys, without so much as a glance in my direction. No acknowledgement, no professional courtesy, not even a curt nod. It stung more than I wanted to admit. Even after everything, some childish part of me had hoped for some kind of recognition, some small sign that they'd seen what I was capable of and respected it. Instead, they walked away, silent and defeated, leaving me standing there with the weight of unfinished personal business pressing on my chest. I took a deep breath, pushed aside the disappointment, and refocused on Mrs. Vega and her family. They were embracing each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. That was what mattered. That evening, back at Metro Community Health Center, my colleagues greeted me with applause as I walked through the doors. Dr. Rodriguez was the first to approach, meeting me in the lobby with a warm embrace and an approving smile. "Well done, Olivia," she said, guiding me toward the staff lounge where a small celebration had been arranged. "That settlement is not just a win for the Vegas, but for every patient who will benefit from the protocol changes. You stood for what was right, even when it was incredibly difficult personally." The team had set up a modest celebration with coffee, homemade desserts, and a hand-drawn congratulatory banner. It was nothing like the elaborate catered affairs Bennett Medical would have arranged, but the sincerity made it infinitely more meaningful. Mrs. Vega and her family had come to express their gratitude as well. Elena, still in her wheelchair but with noticeably improved spirits, took my hand firmly in hers. "You gave us back our dignity, Ms. Bennett," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "The money will help with my care, yes, but knowing that other families won't suffer like we did, that means everything." For the first time that day, I let myself truly smile. Surrounded by people who valued me for my principles and hard work, I felt a sense of accomplishment that no words from my father or Ethan could have given me. This victory belonged to Mrs. Vega and to the values I'd chosen to uphold. Later that night, alone in my apartment, the city lights created patterns across my living room as I sat by the window with a glass of wine. The adrenaline from the day had worn off, and in the quiet, my thoughts inevitably drifted back to my family. I replayed the courtroom moments in my head, the way my father's face had tightened with every piece of evidence we presented, the way Ethan couldn't even look me in the eye when it was over. I had expected them to be angry or defensive, but the silence they left me with was somehow harder to bear. For years, I had dreamed of earning my father's respect, of proving to him that I was worthy, not just of the Bennett name, but of a place in the healthcare system I had once hoped to help lead. And now, even after winning this case against them, I wasn't sure what I had achieved in their eyes. Did they finally see me for who I was, or was I just a painful reminder of their failure to meet their own ethical standards? The questions lingered unanswered as I stared out at the city skyline, wondering if the family ties I'd severed could ever truly be mended, or if they should be. The next morning, as I walked into Metro Community Health Center, the usual sounds of a busy public hospital greeted me, phones ringing at the nurses' station, the gentle beep of monitoring equipment, patients speaking in various languages with healthcare providers. I'd come to find comfort in this controlled chaos, so different from the hushed, hotel-like atmosphere of Bennett facilities. I had barely settled into my office, sorting through follow-up items from the settlement, when my assistant knocked on the door, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Dr. Bennett? Your father is here. He's waiting in the main conference room." The words stopped me mid-motion, my coffee cup suspended halfway to my lips. "My father?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure though my heart had begun racing immediately. "Victor Bennett is here? Now?" She nodded, fidgeting slightly with her ID badge. "He arrived about 20 minutes ago. Dr. Rodriguez has been speaking with him, but he specifically asked to see you. He said it was important." I thanked her, though my mind was already racing as I made my way down the hallway past bulletin boards covered with community health notices and staff recognition awards. What could he possibly want? To threaten further legal action? To demand I stop using the Bennett name professionally? When I opened the door to our modest conference room, nothing like Bennett Medical's sleek boardrooms with their video walls and ergonomic seating, there he was, Victor Bennett, sitting stiffly in a standard-issue chair, his impeccable suit looking out of place against the functional, dated decor. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable, though the slight furrow in his brow betrayed something, discomfort, perhaps, at being in such pedestrian surroundings. "Olivia," he said simply, his voice quieter than I'd heard it in board meetings. I closed the door behind me, keenly aware of curious glances from staff members passing by. This would be through the hospital grapevine within minutes. "Dad," I replied, keeping my tone even and professional. "What brings you to Metro? I imagine this isn't your usual hospital tour." He stood up slowly, smoothing his custom-tailored jacket as though gathering his thoughts. "I came here to speak with you directly," he said, his tone measured but serious, "to say some things that are long overdue." I walked over to the conference table, setting my files down carefully, maintaining the physical barrier between us. "All right," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm listening." He hesitated, glancing around the well-worn conference room with its outdated technology and motivational posters about teamwork, before turning back to me. "You were exceptional during those proceedings, Olivia," he began, his voice softening slightly. "I've worked with healthcare administrators for 40 years, some of the best in the business, and what you did, your analysis, your understanding of both clinical and administrative factors, your advocacy for the patient, it was remarkable. You left no doubt about who the better administrator was." His words caught me off guard, but I maintained my composed expression, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This wasn't just a social call to deliver compliments. I've spent my entire career believing that the Bennett medical legacy meant maintaining control, keeping things within the family, doing things the way they've always been done, he continued, rubbing his temple slightly. I thought I was doing the right thing, pushing Ethan to step up, even when I knew deep down he wasn't suited for hospital administration. "He lacks your analytical mind and your compassion for patients." He paced slightly, the action so uncharacteristic that I found myself genuinely surprised. Victor Bennett didn't pace, he commanded rooms from a position of authority. "The Vega case," he said, stopping to look directly at me. "It forced me to see what our hospitals have become under certain policies. Policies I approved. It's not what I went into medicine to do. And watching you fight for that patient, it reminded me of why I became a doctor in the first place." He drew a deep breath. "I failed you, Olivia. You've worked harder than anyone, earned every credential, produced measurable improvements in every program you've touched. And I failed to recognize that because I was too attached to outdated notions about leadership." I blinked, unprepared for this admission. This was the man who had spent years dismissing my achievements, telling me to focus on appropriate aspects of healthcare. And now he was standing here in the heart of Metro Community Health Center, admitting he was wrong. Why now? I finally asked, my voice steady but cautious. Why are you telling me this now, after everything that's happened? He met my gaze, his blue eyes, so like my own, filled with an honesty I hadn't seen since I was a child following him on hospital rounds. Because I saw what you're capable of, he said simply, and I realized I've been a fool. Ethan isn't ready to lead clinical operations, and he may never be. But you've proven you have what it takes, not just to manage, but to transform healthcare. He stepped closer, his tone almost pleading, another first in my experience. Olivia, I'm asking you to come back to Bennett Medical Group. Not as a wellness coordinator or community outreach director, but as our new Chief Patient Care Officer. The board has already approved the position. The hospital group needs your vision. I need your perspective. The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I had spent so long fighting for this kind of recognition, dreaming of hearing those words from him, but now that they were here, I found myself filled with conflicting emotions. What about Ethan? I asked finally, needing to understand the full picture. What happens to him in this restructuring? My father's face tightened slightly, and he nodded slowly. Ethan will remain with the organization, but in a role better suited to his abilities. Public relations and community engagement, he's always been good with people in a social context. This is about you, Olivia. It's about giving you the authority you've earned and bringing Bennett Medical back to the patient-focused institution it was meant to be. I took a deep breath, watching a nurse wheel a patient past the conference room window, a reminder of why I'd gone into healthcare administration in the first place. I need time to think about this, I said finally, my voice calm but firm. This isn't something I can decide on the spot. A lot has happened, and I've built something meaningful here at Metro. Dr. Rodriguez has trusted me with major initiatives. Our patients count on the programs I've implemented. My father nodded, his expression serious but understanding. Of course, he said. I wouldn't expect an immediate answer. This is a significant decision. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. This contains the formal offer, including the position description we've developed and the authority it would carry. I want you to see that this isn't just a title, it comes with real power to implement the changes you've always advocated for. He placed the folder on the table between us. Take all the time you need. I'm not asking for an answer today, Olivia. I just needed you to know that I recognize what I've done, and that I want to make it right. He moved toward the door, but before he left, he turned back to face me. Olivia, he said, his tone softer now, the clinical detachment momentarily gone. I know I haven't said this enough, or maybe ever, but I am proud of you. Watching you in that courtroom, fighting for that patient's rights, you were better than I ever was, better than I taught you to be. You learned that on your own. His words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment, I just stared at him, unsure of how to respond to this version of my father I barely recognized. He gave me a small, almost hesitant smile before turning and walking out of the conference room, leaving me alone with the offer folder and my thoughts. As I sat at the conference table, his words echoed in my mind. Better than I ever was. For so long, I had fought to prove myself to him, to show that I was more than just his daughter, that I was capable, competent, and deserving of respect in the healthcare field. And now, hearing those words, I felt a complicated surge of pride and lingering hurt that I couldn't simply ignore. Now it's nearly midnight, and I'm lying in bed staring at the ceiling, the offer folder open on my nightstand, its contents meticulously reviewed 3 times. My father's proposal is everything I've worked for, everything I thought I wanted: executive authority to implement patient-centered reforms throughout the entire Bennett medical system, with direct reporting to the board, not through my father. But going back would mean stepping into a world where I was once dismissed, where I'd have to navigate the shadows of old wounds and fractured trust. It would mean working alongside Ethan, knowing the resentment he might harbor. It would mean facing staff who had witnessed my departure and now my return under dramatically different circumstances. And yet, staying where I am has its own complexities. Metro Community Health Center has been good to me, and I've grown here in ways I never imagined. Dr. Rodriguez has been the mentor I always needed. Our patient population genuinely requires advocates who understand their needs. But Metro isn't Bennett Medical Group. The resources are limited, the reach is smaller, and the system changes I could implement would never have the same widespread impact. If I go back, I'd have a chance to transform one of the largest private healthcare networks in the region, to make patient-centered care more than just a marketing slogan. I could reshape the Bennett legacy on my terms, proving that compassionate care and financial sustainability aren't mutually exclusive. The faces of patients like Mrs. Vega float through my mind. How many more could benefit if Bennett's entire network adopted the reforms I've championed? How many lives could be improved or saved if I had the authority to implement system-wide changes? I haven't made up my mind yet. The choice feels momentous, and the weight of the decision keeps me awake, staring at the shadows playing across my bedroom ceiling. Dr. Rodriguez's words from earlier today replay in my thoughts. Whatever you decide, make sure it's for the right reasons, Olivia. Not for validation, not for your father, but for the patients and the kind of medicine you believe in. The choice ahead isn't just about a career move, it's about what kind of healthcare leader I want to be and what legacy I want to build, whether it bears the Bennett name or not. But maybe you can help. What would you do in my situation? Fight from within a flawed system with greater resources, or continue building something new with limited reach? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Healthcare is ultimately about people, and I'd love to hear your perspective.